Hello YouTube, and a very Merry Christmas to all my friends out there in Internet land. I'm very excited because as a lifelong fan of the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, there is a brand new Tolkien book on the market. It's not that new anymore, actually. I'm a little slow of getting to this, but I finally read it. It is J.R.R. Tolkien, The Nature of Middle-earth, edited by Carl Hofstetter. This book consists of some of the last writings Tolkien did in his life about Middle-earth, and is just a wonderful treat because there's been so much of Tolkien's private writings published over the years. I kind of thought we got through all of them already. I didn't know there was much more to be seen, but there is, and this is a wonderful collection, and I want to talk about it. First off, it's probably best to describe kind of who this book is for and what it is not, because I think with the works of Tolkien, it's easy to kind of be misled because people know The Hobbit and people know The Lord of the Rings, and that's what he's famous for, and that's what the movies are about, and those are wonderful, amazing stories. But there's so much more that he wrote about his world of Middle-earth, particularly in the Silmarillion and this whole backstory. And people are kind of often disappointed when they start to encounter that work because it's very different in tone from his other books. It's not so much just a straightforward narrative story. It's more of a mythology that he's built for a mythical version of England. And I think it's really interesting, and I love all that stuff, but you have to be into that kind of thing in order to like it. If you're just a fan of the movies and you try to dip into the Silmarillion, you may be grossly disappointed with what you find there. This book, The Nature of Middle-earth, is something rather different even from the Silmarillion, and I would say if you're just a fan of the movies, you will not find much to enjoy in this book. If you are a casual Tolkien fan who's only read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, you will probably not find very much to enjoy in this book. I would say at minimum you need to have read The Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, and ideally you will have read the entire 12-volume History of Middle-earth series edited by J.R.R. Tolkien's son, Christopher Tolkien. This book is really for the superfan who's read everything Tolkien's done and wants more, because this book is not a story, it's not a narrative, it's not really mythology, it's not the kind of background on the writing of The Lord of the Rings like a lot of the History of Middle-earth books are. It is a collection of unpublished, handwritten mostly, papers from the late 50s to the early 70s, after The Lord of the Rings was published, where J.R.R. Tolkien was trying to kind of work out some of the inconsistencies in his mythology and figure out how to make everything work together in a coherent way. That's what was important to him. Because people forget, the Silmarillion wasn't published during J.R.R. Tolkien's lifetime, and it was actually only published posthumously, edited by his son Christopher, out of kind of unfinished papers. So it's really an unfinished work. It was never given the green light to be published by Tolkien himself. So it complicates this question of, like, what is canon, what's canonical within Tolkien, because people tend to think of the Silmarillion as canonical, but it wasn't finished, and he was revising it up until the end of his life and trying to make it all work with the mythology. So really you can't regard anything other than the things that were published with Tolkien's permission during his lifetime as canonical in that sense. So what a lot of this book is Tolkien kind of going back over his Silmarillion material and trying to figure out how to incorporate the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit material into that world and make everything consistent and coherent, because that was really important to him. If you kind of look at the published Silmarillion, you can see that there's a lot of inconsistencies with the published Lord of the Rings, and there's a lot of things that don't really fit, and he was unsatisfied with that. He wanted to make everything fit into a coherent whole, and this is his attempt to do that in a lot of these papers. So I've talked about what this book is not. What is it? What is in the book? What is it? Well, a lot of these are handwritten notes, as I said. A lot of them are to himself as the main audience. The first section of the book is largely concerned with the life cycles of elves and how fast elves age, if at all, how fast they grow up, how long their pregnancies are, their gestation periods, how many of them there were in the beginning when they were first created. Lots of like mathematical, numerical things where he was trying to work out to make everything work together. Because he's got stories in The Lord of the Rings about Galadriel and about Arwen and Elrond and how they interacted with the world, and he needed to make sure all of their ages kind of lined up. And so there's a lot of very detailed material in the beginning of this book about that, of him going over the numbers again and again and trying to work out a system to figure out how this could all work as a coherent whole. And then the second and third parts of the book are more this kind of miscellaneous writings about Middle-earth, his thoughts on various matters, a wide variety of matters, and trying to work out these ideas in his own head. And I think to me, I find the second and third parts of the book more interesting because there's a lot of things that are more related, more relevant to Lord of the Rings fans, I guess, rather than to Silmarillion fans. There's like, to me, my favorite parts where they talked about the physical appearance of the characters. He wrote this whole diatribe when someone published a poster with drawings of the characters. He did this whole commentary on the poster and just explained what they got right and what they got wrong about the character appearances. So there's a whole chapter about which characters have beards and which ones don't. I thought that was great. I love that kind of stuff. But there's all kinds of things. There's a note on the eating of mushrooms and what races eat mushrooms and which ones don't. But the other thing that's important to remember, kind of going back to what I was saying about the canon, is this is not like, official pronouncements, proclamations about the nature of Middle-earth and about what Middle-earth is. You can't look at these and say, aha, Tolkien said that Middle-earth is this, therefore it's this. Because these are not his final word on the subject. This is him trying to figure stuff out on his own. And he hadn't decided to publish it yet. And he changes his mind frequently. So, you can't really just say this is a Bible that explains everything the way things are in Middle-earth. It doesn't really work that way. I think to a large extent, this book reveals more about Tolkien as an author and as a creator than it does about Middle-earth itself. Like, the content is interesting, but the content is interesting mainly insofar as it tells you what Tolkien was like as a writer and as a creator, and what was important to him and what he was focused on. And I find that really fascinating. Personally, I've never been that into the elves. I never found the elves that fascinating. I like the dwarves, and I like the hobbits, and I like the wizards, and I like that kind of material. And so that's what I was always drawn to as a kid when I first read The Lord of the Rings, and that's what I continue to be drawn to as an adult. So I like the Silmarillion, but it doesn't ever speak to me the way that The Lord of the Rings does, because it's all about the elves. But Tolkien was all about the elves. He loved them, and he spent so much time trying to work out all their biology and their agriculture and all kinds of stories about their mythology, and that's what he's super into. I find the other stuff about, like, there's a section about the timbre of the voices of dwarves in here. Like, that's what I love. But partially because dwarves are left so mysterious in The Lord of the Rings. You really find out very little about them and their culture, but you find out so much about elves. But there's so much about elves in here. He's really focused on that kind of mythology and building up his elvish legends. So, a lot of that material I'm not super engaged with on its own, but I love it for the insight it gives into the author's mind and learning more about how Tolkien thought about his creation and what he was going through as he was trying to revise all this material so he could presumably eventually publish the Silmarillion, although he never got around to it in his lifetime. That's something that, people always wonder about. It's like, the Silmarillion was his kind of passion project from the beginning of when he first started writing about these characters in like the 1920s, 19-teens. And people wonder, like, why did he never publish this? For a long time, it was because publishers were not interested in it. But after The Lord of the Rings was a massive, massive hit, they would have taken anything he gave them. But he didn't want to give them something that wasn't finished. And so he kept working on it and working on it and working on it and trying to, in exhaustive detail, figure out how to harmonize all these different elements. And I think this is a real insight into what he cared about, what was important to him in his mythology, and making it something that he would find acceptable to release to the public. And I love Christopher Tolkien's 12-volume History of Middle-earth series, and I kind of thought we were at the end of that material, and so it's so nice to have more of that material to kind of figure out more of the thought process behind the creation of this incredible world. On the other hand, it's easy to see why Christopher Tolkien didn't ever publish this material in his lifetime. We lost him about a year or two ago, very sadly. I think it was a great blow to the world to have no more Christopher Tolkien editing his father's works and releasing them to the public anymore. But we have Carl Hofstetter, so thank God people are continuing the tradition. But yeah, it's easy to see why he didn't want to mess with these writings, because a lot of them are so technical and so specific and so just delving into the minutia of these like time cycles and these time equivalencies between different races, that I can see why he thought nobody would be interested in this stuff, or he just didn't want to deal with it. Because if you've read any of the History of Middle-earth volumes, there's often pictures, image captures of Tolkien's handwriting, and his handwriting is appalling. It's impossible to read anything he wrote. So like the monumental task of going through his handwritten notes and trying to transcribe it and figure out what he was talking about just would have been tedious and horrible. And I'm glad people are willing to do it so that we can have these lovely bound volumes on our shelves and read them with ease. But they just stacks and stacks of handwritten papers. It must have been just a lifetime of work to go through all that stuff. And so I'm glad people did that. It often makes me think about, the authors of today, how they will be remembered in future years, because we're very, very fortunate that Tolkien left everything that he wrote in stacks of papers in his house. and we have them all, and we can read them and go through them. And like, speaking for myself, when I write something, I write it in a word processing program, and if I want to change something, I delete the part and I rewrite it. And I usually don't have multiple drafts sitting around, and I certainly don't have like my earliest notes sitting around. It all gets replaced. Even if those files were to survive into the future, it'd just be the one file. It wouldn't be every version of every scene that I thought of. Just be the final version. And so it's so nice in Tolkien's case that we have everything he wrote by hand in stacks of papers preserved forever that we can look at. And I guess we're not going to really have that for authors going forward into the future. I guess in summary, I mean, it's kind of hard to say whether you recommend this book or not because it's only for a very specific audience. Unless you're someone who is just completely absorbed in the works of Tolkien and all of his world building and everything, this isn't going to offer very much to you. But if you're someone like me who has read all that material and is obsessed with it, it's great, and it's a wonderful collection to have, even though some of the material is a little tedious to go through, like just the insight into the mind of the artist is worth it, well worth the cover price. So if you are one of those people, I strongly urge you to pick up The Nature of Middle-earth, which I assume you've already done at this point, because if you're like me and people who are into that stuff, you probably already have it. But if you haven't, you should. And if you're just a casual fan who's only like read the Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and seen the movies, maybe pick up the Silmarillion or Unfinished Tales and delve into that and see if you want to go further into that world, because it is very tonally different. And I think a lot of people are kind of dismayed when they get to that material because it's so different from what they were expecting. But dip your toe in, read it, see what you think, and if you love it, then you'll always have this to come back to as further information about the world and about the author's thoughts on the world. That's all I've got to say about The Nature of Middle-earth. I really enjoyed it. It was a great gift for the holidays to have more work from Tolkien. I wonder if there's anything else out there. I wonder if we'll continue to see more unpublished writings coming to light. I kind of feel like there can't be that much more, but maybe there is. Who knows? So we'll just have to see going forward. But that's my review. I've been Logan Albright. Thanks so much for watching, and have a very happy holidays.